Hello, hello, hello. My name is Madison and welcome back to my channel. Today we have a very special True Crime and Society video. This whole month actually is going to be dedicated to Asian and Pacific Islander History Month, which is May. So I'm really excited for my first installment of that. So today's True Crime and Society video is going to be discussing Agent Orange and the effects it still has on the people who were exposed to it both in Vietnam as well as the United States, and how this is definitely a true crime situation and a true crime video. I'm also going to talk a little bit about my personal experience going to Vietnam when I was in high school. My senior year of high school, I went with a small group of girls. I went to an all-girls school, and we got the opportunity to go to Vietnam. So I spent a little under 2 weeks there. So I'm going to insert some pictures and talk about my experience. The whole scope of the trip really was a historical lesson about the Vietnam War from the other perspective. So it really opened my eyes to a lot of things. I got to meet somebody who suffered from Agent Orange. I went to their museum called the Museum of American Atrocities, and you got to see babies that were born stillborn that they put in kind of like an embalming fluid, so you can see the effects of Agent Orange on babies that were deformed and things like that. And I went to a theme park, which basically was a place where they showed the different ways that they did guerrilla warfare and things like that. They also had a little bit of something like that at the Museum of American Atrocities. So I'm going to kind of pepper in my personal experience and having gone to Vietnam and what I learned there, what I appreciated about the culture and things like that while I talk about this video. That was long-winded. Well, if you're new here, please like this video, subscribe, press that notification bell so you know when to tune into another video from me. I do true crime content mostly. I also do show reactions, and I do documentary reactions, all kind of in this true crime vein. So yeah, and if you're particularly interested in the stories I'm going to be highlighting for Asian American and Pacific Islander History Month, I will be tuning in every Thursday at 6 p.m. You will get a new video from me regarding the topic. So in terms of my True Crime and Society videos, I'm going to be doing another one, and we're going to talk about the Asian spa murders as well as the Stop the Asian Hate situation that was happening during COVID. And then I'm going to be doing, for my documentary reaction, a reaction to an Agent Orange documentary, which is going to be kind of intense. And I'm still deciding what I'm going to do for my show, so that'll be up in the air. But without further ado, let's get into the video. Also, if you're returning, love you. Comment below. Thank you so much for subscribing and loving my content. Love you. Okay, let's get into the video. So like I said in the intro, I went to Vietnam my senior year of high school, and the trip itself was supposed to take us through different historical landmarks that had to do with the Vietnam War. It was a really, really informative trip. I absolutely adored it. I had so much fun doing it and being able to go. It's one of my most favorite and cherished memories. But on that trip, I remember we were being talked to by a man who fought for the Viet Cong and was exposed to Agent Orange, and he was talking about his personal experience and showing us some of the physical effects it had on his body. His hands actually were deformed, in the nails, his nail beds were deformed, and he was talking about how he has 2 kids and they both have some sort of like mental disability or physical disability or what have you. And I remember the person that was translating basically said, you know, what most people don't know about Agent Orange is the last person to be affected by Agent Orange has not been born yet. And that stuck with me because I was like, what does that even mean? You know, like the war happened almost 50 years ago. It ended almost 50 years ago. It started in 1955. but it ended almost 50 years ago. And what does that mean? And so when we got to meet this man, and he was describing, how the dioxins of Agent Orange live in your system, and, you pass it down to your wife. If you're exposed to it and you have sex with your wife, she gets the dioxins in her body and they pass through to your children. And so it's a real generational thing. And as the generations get further and further from the person who is directly exposed to it, the effects are milder and milder, but it still is one of those things that continues down the legacy of your family, if only one person was exposed to it. So I remember being like, okay, I heard about this. I remember my sister telling me something about Agent Orange when I was young, and kind of hearing about it in high school when we were learning about the Vietnam War, but not a lot. So going to Vietnam really opened my eyes about what big of an effect it has on, particularly in the northern region of Vietnam, their day-to-day lives. So I wanted to make this video because environmental racism is a real thing. And it's so sad because everything in this country has a racism qualifying it in some capacity, but environmental racism is a real thing. And basically, environmental racism is how disproportionately for people of color in this country, or the people of color that we fight wars with, directly with this country, chemical warfare, placing, factories in specific neighborhoods. That's why there's an increased proportion of Black kids and brown kids with asthma and chronic conditions like that because of the pollution in the air where they live. And I always kind of would come back to thinking about Agent Orange, since that trip. And when I was deciding to make this channel, I knew that one of my YouTube videos was going to be about this. Now, for the month of April, I did a True Crime and Society video about the Flint water crisis. And this is similar in terms of how negligence and lack of care and lack of knowledge and just devaluing of a specific community of people can lead to direct consequences that'll be with them for the rest of their lives. So similar to the lead in the water in Flint, Agent Orange has totally destabilized whole regions in Vietnam and whole families. And I think it's just really important to talk about through the lens of environmental racism. Now, if you're asking, how is this a true crime video? Yeah, on my channel, I like to approach true crime in a little bit of a different way. I like to have, classic true crime stories like what we're going to be expecting for May with the Asian spa murders. But I also really, really enjoy talking about the systems and society and how big situations like Agent Orange could be a true crime story. To me, it is a true crime story, and we're viewing it through the lens of a true crime story. So you get both the micro true crime stories where it's on the individual basis, as well as the macro true crime stories that is on a systematic basis. So this is one of those videos. Please bear with me, and we are going to get right into it. So yeah. So the Vietnam War, which is also known as the Second Indochina War, was fought from November 1st, 1955 to April 30th, 1975 with the fall of Saigon. And it was fought in both Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Now, the Vietnam War is a topic that I'm obsessed with and have been for literal years. It is post-World War II into this era of time is probably one of my most addicting historical time periods that I'm always watching documentaries about and wanting to learn more about. And it's just was a crazy time. I don't know how else to put that. I've taken so many classes about this time period because it was tumultuous, both with all the proxy wars that we were fighting post World War II due to communism, but also internally with, we have the civil rights movement brewing, we have gay rights on the horizon, women's rights on the horizon, anti-war movement obviously on the horizon. So it was just a real tumultuous time in the United States, and I absolutely love learning about this time period. Now, the Vietnam War, geez, it's a mess. It's a really sad situation, and let me kind of go into it. So, like I said, I forgot which video I was talking. Oh, I was talking about this in my Freeway Rick Ross video, which is another good one. It's a documentary reaction about the crack epidemic. But I was kind of explaining how after World War II finished, Europe was completely decimated, like within an inch of its life. Had we not stepped in, and we only stepped in because of Pearl Harbor, had we not stepped in, I don't know what Europe would be like at this point. They were really on their last leg, and we came in with fresh soldiers, money, and artillery to be able to stave off, the Germans. And through that process, we got ourselves out of the Great Depression and became totally thriving at that point in time. That's why it's called the Golden Era. And we also became solidified as a worldwide superpower, which is why a lot of white people like to look back at this time with happiness and joy, because for them, this was the heyday of America. We were at the front lines. We were the leaders. We were in control of our messaging. We were the good guys. And World War II was one of those wars where it was very much a very clear villain situation and a very clear good guy situation. So we really took that kind of feeling and have been trying to replicate that for years, and we never been able to. And in the process, we've ruined and destabilized so many countries. So after World War II, we were on top and Russia was on top. Pretty much. It was kind of the other superpower. And instead of trying to mend fences and have an alliance, we started staring each other down, and the Cold War era started just like that. So because we had opposing ideologies, which, I have a lot of opinions about, and we'll get into them right now. So, capitalism and communism directly oppose each other or whatever, but personally, just like we have the autonomy to choose a capitalistic, democratic society, the people in Russia or whatever had the autonomy to choose whatever ideology they wanted to build their nation out to follow. And so the fact that instead of finding a way to find middle ground or try to work together or not have this animosity, like we were threatening each other and we had to beat them in everything, a lot of lives, a lot of countries, a lot of everything would be so different. And it just makes me sad that it's always about war, and it's always about being the best and being number one in this country as well as other countries. So suffice it to say, Europe was a mess, and we were staring down Russia as World War II ended, and we are kind of like, okay, now we're in a war of ideology with Russia, which is basically what the Cold War was. Even though the Cold War wasn't cold, it was extremely hot in places where brown people exist. But that's where Vietnam comes into play. In the United States during this time, we were having the Red Scare, where people were being called out as being communists and communist sympathizers, propaganda in schools about communism. And you hear a lot of this rhetoric from the right today about communists, and you guys are communists and socialists and evil and stuff. It's very much the propaganda that they were taught when they were younger. This time, the fear of communism spreading was like the number one fear in the United States. We needed to make sure that the dominoes didn't fall. And that's kind of, where that ideology came about. The domino effect, where if one country fell to communism, the next country would fall to communism, then the next and the next and the next, and then we'd be surrounded by communists and be fighting for our lives as a country, which obviously was alarmist, because in all actuality, our military was much stronger than Russia's. Our money was much longer than Russia's. Our influence was much longer and stronger than Russia's. So, or the Soviet Union at the time. So, for us to kind of hype up this fear to the point that we destabilized all of Central and South America. We destabilized Africa. We destabilized Vietnam and all those countries in the Southeast Asia area, Laos and Cambodia included. But the fear was really like all in our head, and we escalated things constantly. So again, here we have Vietnam. Now, basically with Vietnam, where do I start with this? Here we go. So post World War II, as the world is still reeling and trying to heal, a lot of former colonies were vying for their independence. And they were trying to vie for their independence based on, you know, the tactics and the ideology of the United States a lot of the time. And a lot of people were successful. There's a lot of African countries found their independence in the 60s, and a lot of just former colonies were trying to get independent from Europe and America and all of these places. And that was what was kind of the fuel for World War II. I mean, for the Cold War, because all of these countries were trying to be independent, and Russia and America are looking at all these little countries trying to be independent, and they're trying to find as many allies as they can as possible in order to be able to have a bigger sphere of influence than the other person. Now, you know, this is the term where first world, second world, and third world countries come from. First world country was America, second world country was the Soviet Union, and the third world countries were all the countries that hadn't picked a side yet. And so all of these wars, all of these situations that started, like Korea and, like I said, South and Central America, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, all of these wars were based on us trying to divvy up whether these third world countries are going to be on the first world side or the second world side. Long-winded explanation, but you need context for this because this is a very important story. So that was what was happening in Cold War era United States. So again, this all is working together to again keep the hysteria up in order to continue having public support for these wars and these fights against communism that were really just us shouting into the void and being really dramatic and wanting to be the one and only leader of the entire world. So after World War II, France was trying to recolonize Vietnam because Vietnam was a French colony. Now, I think this is really important. The leader of Vietnam at the time, Ho Chi Minh, he wrote up a constitution that was very similar to the United States and went to the United States leaders to try and get a meeting with them to be like, I would love to have democracy in Vietnam. I would love these things. Blase, blase, squaze, squaze. And you know what we did? We brushed him off and kept it pushing. Because French and America were allies, of course, due to World War II, and I think World War I too, we were long-standing allies. So if the French were trying to recolonize Vietnam, that was cool, violence included, because we were allies with them. So Vietnam was not going to be communist, and we could live with that. But the people of Vietnam did not want to be recolonized. They wanted to be independent. They wanted to seek independence, and they wanted to be able to be self-governing. So French is in this war with Vietnam, and that's the first Indochina War. And it's going terribly for the French. One, they're broke because of World War II, and they don't have the money to continue putting into trying to recolonize the entire place of Vietnam. So they ask us to fund it. So in 1954, we start funding what's going on in Vietnam with the French. Now, this is where we effed up because we got ourselves involved in a whole situation. So essentially, you know, we are financing French trying to recolonize the Vietnam area into its absorb it into its own again, and the Vietnamese are not having it because they're seeing all these countries gain independence, gain the ability to be self-governing during this time of, post-World War, confusion, and they're vying for that for themselves. So they are not giving up. They have been colonized by the Chinese. They have been colonized by the Spanish. They have been colonized by the French. They are not trying to be colonized again. So they're giving it, and the French are losing. Not only are they losing money, but they're losing the ability to govern and control their former colony. So again, we come into finance, but then we start to get more and more and more involved. So we come to help the French, with tactical stuff. We give them arms. Then we start putting boots to the ground there. Then we start actually fighting. Then we start actually, you know what I mean? So it really becomes a snowball effect of our involvement. We get swept up into this whole situation. And of course, it was for economic reasons, of course. And so, I wouldn't say swept up is the right word. We got ourselves involved in it when we really shouldn't have been involved. And so that goes on. That's happening. And in 1955, we basically, in more of an official sense, have boots to the ground in Vietnam, and we're really, really having more of a direct effect in this French-Vietnamese kind of colonial war that's going on. And at the end of the day, the French end up backing out. So now it becomes the United States and Vietnam. And already Vietnam is annexed. So basically it's similar to Korea, which was also annexed. South Vietnam is for democracy, and North Vietnam, the Viet Cong, as they are called, is for communism. So anyway, we'll continue on. Now, here's the thing. We get involved, and we are getting our asses handed to us. No amount of money, no amount of training could prepare our soldiers for the way that the Viet Cong knew how to fucking fight on their territory. It is hot. Okay, there are bugs, there are diseases. It is a jungle. The terrain itself does not lend well to people who grew up in Northern America. So we are getting our asses handed to us. Not only that, but the way that the Viet Cong were fighting against us was not through, traditional means of, tactical things, and we're all coming with heavy machinery and this and that. No, they were using something called guerrilla warfare. So guerrilla warfare means this, and I'm going to quickly read it off of my notes. Guerrilla warfare is a form of irregular warfare in which small groups of combatants, such as paramilitary personnel, armed civilians, or irregulars, use military tactics, including ambushes, sabotage, raids, petty warfare, hit-and-run tactics, and mobility to fight a larger and less mobile traditional military. Wow, that was such a good definition. So citizens, everyone was being trained to fight America. Our women, children were being armed and trained to use their terrain to their advantage. And like it said, it's small groups of people sabotaging, bombing, shooting up, doing raids, things like that would really disrupt the big United States military presence that could not move as freely and loosely as the guerrilla warfare, as the Viet Cong, who were using guerrilla warfare. And this is where the star of the show comes to play. Because the jungles in Vietnam are so thick that when you are flying a helicopter through, you can't see through it. So you could not see an attack coming. You could not see where they were hiding. You could not get any tea on their positioning because they were using the jungle to their advantage, right? So what did we decide to do as the United States? We decided to invent Agent Orange. Now, I'm not sure if this is true or not, which I couldn't totally find it. I think a part of the invention of Agent Orange happened at my college, which is sad, UC Santa Cruz. So part of them, researching how to make Agent Orange happened at UC Santa Cruz, which is nothing to be proud of. We'll continue. So again, I say all that context to say that Agent Orange was invented to defoliate the thick jungle leaves in order to basically leave no place for the Viet Cong to hide out. Okay, so we would spray Agent Orange over thousands of miles of land, of jungle, and all of the leaves would just die. All of the leaves would die, all of the foliage would die, all of the thick jungle would die out. And as we flew over, now we can see, where they're, planning. Now we can see their tactical movements. Now we could really get a good eye and get hopefully a leg up on what their situation was in terms of how they were fighting us, which is the start of horror, in my opinion. So here we go. So like I said, Agent Orange is an herbicide, part herbicide and a defoliant that was used in Operation Ranch Hand in the Vietnam War from 1961 to 1971. So 10 years of using this extremely toxic, extremely deadly, poisonous, environmentally unfriendly chemical and just spraying it all throughout the jungle of Vietnam. 10 years of using this, okay? So in terms of what Agent Orange consisted of, it was equal parts herbicide 2,4,5-T and 2,4-D, and it had one of the most, or I think the most toxic dioxins, which is TCDD. And with any contact with that, as a human, you will get very ill. You will get very sick. You can suffer mental health issues, physical issues. It is just overall super dangerous. And it's one of those things that just stays in the soil. It stays in your body, and you can pass it to people as you've been exposed because it stays in all aspects of your body. So just a recipe for disaster, people. Recipe for disaster. So I'm going to insert before and after pics of what the jungles looked like before versus after they sprayed Agent Orange on it. And you'll see how big of an effect it had on completely decimating the entire jungles and killing off all the foliage. But again, like I said, it was all because of the fact that the Viet Cong were familiar with their land. They knew exactly where to hide, how to fight using small tactical groups. And it was one of those things it was so like the United States, because it's like, one, you're getting involved in a situation that has nothing to do with you, and you're getting involved on the wrong side just because you're allied with the French. These people are wanting to self-govern. And instead of staying true to the United States motto, which is spreading democracy and allowing nation states to exist with autonomy so they can choose what kind of governmental system they want to have by the people, instead of doing something like that, we decide we're going to get involved. We are going to help the French. Oh, we're just going to send money. Oh, actually, we'll send arms and help them. Oh, we're going to just advise them. Oh, now we're here and we're fighting. Oh, now we're actually training the Vietnam. Oh, the French aren't even involved in this whole fight anymore. Okay, cool. Now that we're so locked in, there's no turning back. So instead of hiring somebody that was familiar with guerrilla warfare, talking and taking points from the South Vietnamese of what they know about the terrain and creating new tactical ways to fight this war on their terms, we're just going to cancel the jungle. We are going to create a poison and we're going to drop it on the jungle for thousands of miles. We're canceling the jungle. You know what? We're just going to handle the problem ourselves. We're going to completely fuck up thousands of miles of this terrain in order to fight this war. It's sick. It's so sick. And to be fair, obviously they didn't really know how intensely Agent Orange was going to affect, you know what I mean, what was going on. I will say that they had no idea. So instead of testing it out or trying to, see if this would have any long-term effects for the environment, for the people who came in contact with it, because it wasn't just the Viet Cong that got affected by it. It was anybody who sprayed it, anybody who was in the area that was sprayed, anybody who, you know what I mean? So it was also a lot of U.S. soldiers had effects from the Agent Orange because they were the people who sprayed it. They were the people who it was sprayed on them, all sorts of things. So instead of researching anything, they were like, oh, this works fine for this one purpose. I don't care if there's any side effects. We're spraying it on thousands of miles of land and people. So here we are. And I quickly want to insert my experience in Vietnam about the guerrilla warfare thing because I think it's super interesting. And I'll see if I still have pictures about this. But basically at the Museum of American Atrocities, they had this whole section where they showed, the different traps, booby traps and different things that they would use to catch Americans up. So one tactic that they would use was dig a hole, right? And then at the bottom of the hole, there'd be sharpened bamboo spikes at the bottom, and they'd be smeared with feces. And then they cover the hole with like dirt and like leaves and stuff. And Americans would walk on it in the jungle, fall in, impale themselves with the feces covered things, and then they're just like totally screwed because one, they're fully impaled, but also the infection from the feces was gonna just kill them anyway. It would already turn septic basically. So different tactics like that. There's all sorts of different types of booby traps, nets, catching people up in the air. Just lots of interesting, very innovative ways that don't really have to do with guns only, that would really, really F up a lot of the United States soldiers because they weren't familiar with the land. They weren't familiar with, oh, this dirt looks a little loose. They were just trudging along. So I thought that was such a cool part of the museum. It was really interesting to learn about that. And we went to something called a theme park off of the Mekong Delta. And it wasn't like a Disneyland thing. It basically was a theme park based around the Vietnam War, where you go around and you can look at different exhibits about, the different guerrilla warfare systems that they would use, how they would get food, how they would, protect the children, how they would capture soldiers, how they would fight, different guns that they use, different tactics that they use, all of these things, how they would train. And, you just walk around this big, park basically, and they, you can sit in different sections and they have little clips of a movie that you can watch dictating how the Viet Cong were able to hold so strong against the United States. And then at the end, you're able to shoot an M16, which was really crazy. And that was my first and only time shooting a gun. And I hated it. I did not enjoy it. But so they're very proud. The thing is, here's what I will say. Here's what I'll say about the people of Vietnam in my experience. Obviously I wasn't there for like years or whatever. And obviously it has its faults. Every country does. But what I appreciated was learning about the war from a different perspective. In America, when we learn about it, it's a failed war. It's a very embarrassing loss for us. It caused so much turmoil racially and with the draft, with class, there's so many conversations happening on American soil about Vietnam, and all of those conversations are attached to Vietnam. But looking at it from a different perspective and learning from it and meeting with these people and having them tell their story and them being so, so, so forgiving about it and being loving and all of these things. And we're just, we're just American girls from an American school learning about this from a different perspective. Another thing that I thought was really interesting and super cool was it was just not frilly. You know what I mean? they were so proud of themselves for being able to stave off America. They won, and rightfully so, because all they were fucking doing was fighting for their independence, like we did against the British. And instead of seeing ourselves in them because they weren't white, we saw them as the enemy, and we just kind of totally screwed them over in so many ways. And not only Vietnam, because like I said, we were in Laos and Cambodia, and we were lying to the American people about that. We are doing bombing raids, we are doing Agent Orange all over Laos, all over Cambodia at the same time. And it was all in the name of this fight between us and the Soviet Union on soil that was neither ours or the Soviet Union's. And I think that's like one of the biggest takeaways. We were going there with our chests puffed out, fighting this invisible war with this invisible iron giant that, whatever. When in reality, every nation that is independent deserves to be able to choose how they're going to be governed and what ideology they're going to use to be governed. We were there thinking, oh, this is going to be easy. This is a small ass little ass country that was colonized 1,000,001 times. It's not going to take us long. It's not going to be very hard. We're not going to have to put too much effort in here. All of a sudden, we lose, and we're there for 20 fucking years, and we lose respect because you're lying to the American people about the extent of your involvement. You're forcing kids to be drafted into this fucking war. You're doing all of these things where at the end of the day, you cause so much turmoil, not only on our soil but there, and completely decimated this country based on our own bravado, essentially. But these people were fighting for their independence, so they were going to fight till their last. And that's what we didn't really understand. They were going to fight until their last. So it was never going to end until we left. And we thought we could control them, and we could gain as much territory as we can and then be able to leverage that for control. These people were not going to give up the hope of independence. And I think even looking at a Goliath of an opponent like the United States, especially militaristically, it's something to commend, because they were not going to give up on their country. They were not going to be colonized again. They were going to return to their original culture and be able to control themselves. And I love that message. I really do. Also, something really cool that I think I'll just pop in here. I got to meet the Napalm Girl. We went to her, that was part of the trip. Her family owns a really cute restaurant. We had pho there, and she talked to us and showed us her scarring. If you know what the Napalm Girl, it's a very, very famous image of a girl who's completely naked, and she had been hit by napalm, which is like jelly-like fire, which is like just crazy. It's just a crazy thing to be hit by that and survive. And she showed us her scarring, and she was later invited to my high school to speak, which I thought was really, really cool that they did that. And she was honestly one of the most beautiful people I'd ever heard speak, I'd ever talked to. And maybe I'll make a video about that a different time, about the Napalm Girl. But we got to meet her, and we ate at her family's restaurant and had a lovely, lovely time. So yeah, we'll continue. So like I said previously, Agent Orange was extremely fucking toxic. So anyone who came in contact with it would have severe health effects, and they would suffer severe health effects. And not only that, you would pass it through your wife if you had sex with her. And, certain things like, South Vietnamese women were tested and their breast milk had Agent Orange in it. Or soldiers that were fighting and got sprayed with Agent Orange, their blood had Agent Orange in it. So you see, it spread throughout the body, it permeates throughout the body and makes you severely sick, and you can't get past it. If you pass it to your wife and she has your child, it's likely that one, she'll either miscarry, or 2, your child will suffer severe health defects like missing limbs, mental problems, being stillborn, things like that. And, extra limbs, no limbs at all. It's just a really, really, really aggressively toxic chemical that we just sprayed without a care over thousands and thousands and thousands of miles in land in Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia. And it was so eye-opening when I went to Vietnam and met this man who had fought for the Viet Cong. And he said, he was fighting and then he was sprayed with something. And then once he came home, his fingers, like in the look of his fingers was so interesting. They were like super puffy and his nail beds looked like they were like jumping out of his fingers. I don't know how to explain it, but just super, super puffy, like this. His fingers were like this, like very thick fingers, and his nails were just really thick too, but like really small and brown, and just like, it was just something I'd never seen before. And he was such a cool dude too, because he was just like super forgiving, living a life with his family off of the Mekong Delta, and just would talk to different tour groups about his experience. He was really sad that he passed it to his wife, and their children had issues with they had behavioral issues, mental issues, and some physical disabilities or something like that. But he didn't come at it where he was like, fuck America or whatever, which he has every right to say, and I don't blame him. I wouldn't blame him at all, but he was just very much like, it is what it is. I still have a beautiful life. I still have beautiful children and all of these things. Like, a lot of the attitude about us there, like, I don't know, it's so forgiving in a lot of ways with the people that we talk to. And it was just like, wow, like, I would hate America. I would hate Americans. I would not be sitting here trying to explain to this group of girls who go to a private school in California, talking to them about how difficult my life has been since their government poisoned me and my whole entire family. But he did, and it was a beautiful experience. He was a really, really humble, very, very sweet man, and I will never forget him. So the Vietnamese government says 4 million people were exposed to Agent Orange, and of those 4 million, 3 million of those people suffer some sort of health defect or illness directly based on their exposure to said Agent Orange, and that figure includes children and things like that. The Red Cross estimates that over 1 million people in Vietnam suffer from some sort of health, were exposed and suffer from some sort of health issue directly related to Agent Orange, and the United States continues to deny that even that number is true, which is obviously just classic us, denying responsibility, denying accountability, all of the things. So you can already see a huge discrepancy in what the Vietnamese government is saying in terms of exposure and effects, and then what the Red Cross is saying, which is conservatively a lot less. And then the United States isn't even accepting the 1 million number at all. So it's just kind of like, wow. It's sad. So like I said before, some of the birth defects that can happen with children, you can be a miscarriage, you can be born with a cleft palate, you can be born with extra limbs, you can be born with no limbs, you can have severe developmental issues, mental issues, rashes, just birth defects that really, like, they run the gambit, but they vary in terms of severity, but just things that people had not seen before. And it's all because this is such a poisonous thing. So the most affected area by Agent Orange is in the Long Mountains, and that is like the direct border between Vietnam and Cambodia, and the people who live there live in extreme poverty and they live off the land, which is also something we'll get into a little later about why Agent Orange is such a terrible, terrible, toxic thing. But yeah, so a lot of those people live off the land, they live in poverty, and they also have severe, severe health issues because of their exposure and constant exposure to Agent Orange. So as for the effects on the US soldiers, basically from their perspective, they were told by the government and told by the military that Agent Orange was completely harmless. It wasn't going to affect them. If it got on them, they would be totally fine. It was just a harmless chemical and it only affected plants, which obviously wasn't true. Now, these men became super suspicious that that wasn't true when their children were being born with birth defects and their wives were just having miscarriage after miscarriage after miscarriage, and they were suffering severe health issues that they had never suffered before. So by 1977, which is 2 years post Vietnam, a lot of them got together and started filing claims to the VA and stuff in order to try and get some sort of test done or compensation or accountability for the fact that they were told this is harmless and it clearly wasn't harmless, and they were guaranteed that it was harmless, and it very obviously is the opposite of harmless. So claims started to come in about Agent Orange, and almost all of them were denied by the United States government because they were hard pressed to be able to find concrete proof that it was the Agent Orange exposure that was causing all these health problems with them and their family and their children. So it was hard to find that kind of connection because the United States wasn't going to look into it, and they just knew that they were people who were exposed to it in a heavy dosage, and now they have these birth defects. So it was kind of like not concrete data. Do you know what I mean? So the United States was like, well, we're denying the claims and we're not looking into it. So claims were being denied left and right, even though they were reassured and guaranteed that this was 100% healthy and 100% harmless. So by April 1993, the United States had paid 493 American citizens and accepted their claims that Agent Orange had affected their lives, even though there was nearly 40,000 claims that they had denied this fact to. So there's still a long way to go, and there's still a lot of families that had not gotten any compensation or any accountability for the fact that they have to suffer now by the effects of Agent Orange through their whole lineage. And yeah, so just under 500 people have gotten compensated, and their concerns had been validated by the government that yes, we were in the wrong for exposing you to Agent Orange out of 40,000. So that's pretty crazy. It's like kind of sad. Here's one of the most effed up things about this. So during the Vietnam War, both Cambodia and Laos stayed neutral, all right? But the United States, was doing secret CIA bombing campaigns both in Laos and Cambodia, and we are keeping that secret from the American public. So the American public was only privy to the fact that we were just in Vietnam and the war was not going well or whatever. And when we were really in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, fighting wars in all of these places, and we were keeping it secret. So basically, we bombed Cambodia and Laos. Like, we had crazy bombing campaigns in Cambodia and Laos, and we had people stationed there. And of course, they also suffered from us defoliating using Agent Orange in their countries as well. So in Laos, I believe it was almost 500,000 gallons of Agent Orange was dropped on Laos, and 40,000 gallons of Agent Orange was dropped on Cambodia. Now, here's where it gets really messed up. Because this is something that we still deny that we were a part of, even though people were stationed there and there's evidence that we were obviously there, we decided that all the people, all the American soldiers, all the CIA personnel who came in contact with Agent Orange, but they were stationed in either Laos and Cambodia, all their claims would be denied, because by admitting that they had exposure to Agent Orange in those countries, that would subsequently admit that we were illegally fighting wars in those countries. So all those claims were denied. Sick people. So now we get into the ecological effects. And again, we're going to get into why that's particularly terrible. So all in all, 17.8% of the forests of Vietnam were sprayed with Agent Orange, which is a huge portion. And because of the persistent nature of dioxins as chemicals, they get in the water supply, they get into the food chain, they stay in the soil, they just don't leave, combined with the fact that all of the loss of foliage and the death of the trees, the death of all the plants in those huge swaths of area completely make it impossible for the forest to regrow there. And that's an issue for the animals, for the people who live off the land, all of those things. It's a huge issue. And so the combination of the physical effect of what Agent Orange did to the plants and the animals in the areas is completely devastating and cannot be undone. But it's also the fact that the dioxin itself, TCDD, is so toxic that it just stays in every aspect of nature. It stays in the soil, it stays in, which bleeds into the water supply, which then bleeds into the animal supply if they drink the water, which means now they have the dioxins inside of them. Now you're eating these animals, or you're farming the land, or you're fishing, and you see how it just kind of becomes a huge snowball effect where no one will be free from it. Unless the United States takes some responsibility to try and clean it up, but it's already in the food chain. It's already in the water supply, particularly in that long mountain area between Cambodia and Vietnam. So think about that, and think about how devastating and toxic Agent Orange is. And it's in the water supply. It's in the fish. It's in the air. It's in the soil. You can't farm here. You know what I'm saying? But you have no choice because you live here. It's sad. So again, as you would obviously assume, it greatly affected the animals living in that area. So I just want to make sure I get this right. Okay. So in an area of the Vietnam jungle that was sprayed, there was 24 species of birds that lived there and 5 species of mammals that were able to live there. In a couple unsprayed areas to compare, there was 45 different species of birds, 145 different species of birds, 170 different species of birds, and there's about 30 to 55 different species of mammals living in that area. So again, greatly affected, greatly affects everything. And as we know, with what we're dealing with in this whole climate change era in our society, this is so important to take into account, right? How we poison Mother Earth and how that then affects everything around us. It's in the water, it's in the soil, it's in the food chain. No, the forest will never be able to recover. It's in us. We are passing it down. If a grandpa was exposed to Agent Orange, it's likely that his wife was not able to have children, but she is exposed to it. And if they do have children, their kids have some sort of birth defects or issues mentally or whatever. Or if they don't, which is a rare occasion, they have the dioxin in them, and if they have kids, it just continues to go on and on. So that's what the translator was saying to us when he was saying, the last person to be affected by Agent Orange has yet to be born, because it just goes and goes and goes and goes. So, yeah. So, again, like I said, the United States refuses to take responsibility. They do not want to go and clean up their mess. There are ways that you can kind of clean up the areas that are most affected. And of course, those areas are United States bases in Vietnam that have obviously been abandoned. So we could go there and try and clean up and do biohazard cleanup of this toxin in this area as much as we can, but obviously that would cost us money. And since we don't even believe in climate change in the United States, do you really think we're going to do something ecologically friendly for Vietnam, a country that beat us in a war? Of course not. So not only do we deny the amount of people in Vietnam that have been affected by this, we also deny that we are responsible for it, even though we invented it, and we deny taking responsibility for cleaning it up. So like the person in Vietnam said, this is going to be a persistent thing in Vietnam until the end of time. So that's fun. Like, sociologically speaking, like when you think about how messed up it is that we poisoned thousands of miles of land, poisoned thousands of people, and we just don't really care. This is a farming area. People live off the food of the land, the fruit of the land, especially in the rural areas of Vietnam. So one, if they're not able to fish in certain places, that's a problem. If, and contaminated fish is eaten by a fish from another area, then that fish becomes contaminated and can contaminate more and more areas of Vietnam. You know what I'm saying? And it's in the water supply in these areas. It's in the soil in these areas. It's in the food sources in these areas. So it's just like so ingrained, and it's been there since the war, and it has such a strong effect on everyone's day-to-day lives. Like, people can't make money. People can't, sell contaminated fish, or do they just sell the contaminated fish in order to make money, and people just know I'm contaminated. You know what I mean? And contaminated meaning they have the dioxin. And is that just how they live their lives? It affects if people want to have children. It affects everything. And it just is so disturbing and disgusting that we just don't care. So one of the the United States military's policies when they were fighting the Vietnam War was to destroy their crops, which is messed up. So in rural populations, it was a goal to destroy the access to using the land to grow crops, to get a livelihood, to feed their families. It was greatly encouraged for the government officials to destroy that land. So I'm going to read you a memorandum from the Rand Corporation. So to underscore this fact. So here we go. The Viet Cong obtain most of their food from the neutral rural population, dictates the destruction of civilian crops. If they are to be hampered by the crop destruction program, it will be necessary to destroy large portions of the rural economy, probably 50% or more. Crops were deliberately sprayed with Agent Orange, and areas were bulldozed clear of vegetation, forcing many rural civilians to cities. As the war progressed, the urban population in South Vietnam nearly tripled, growing from 2.8 million people in 1958 to 8 million people by 1971. The rapid flow of people led to fast-paced and uncontrolled urbanization. An estimated 1.5 million people were living in Saigon slums, and causing overcrowding. So again, this was all deliberate, which is crazy. This was all deliberate, calculated in so many ways, and it didn't matter how many people were casualties along the way. It was deliberate to ruin their food source as a tactical move through Agent Orange, through just bulldozing and burning big swaths of land so that these people would have to move into the cities in order to survive. Right? And it's just like there's no ever thought about social, political, any kind of effect that this could have on the region. There's never any care. And yeah, some people may say they're our enemies, da 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 da. Who cares? And that's the problem with thinking that way. We all have to live in this world together, and by hurting each other so deliberately like this, it just irks my soul and makes me so sad. Not only have you poisoned millions of people, but you've also poisoned the way that they are able to make money and have food. Wow. That's sick. So, as you may have already guessed, there's several class action lawsuits against the United States on behalf of this whole situation. It's either people who were directly affected by Agent Orange and exposed, or people who are trying to head up cleanup efforts in the areas that were exposed. And of course, these people are both Vietnamese and American. The finger is pointed directly at the United States, and the Vietnamese believe it's the United States' responsibility to not only pay out people, compensate people for being exposed and help with that, but also the cleanup effort. And of course, we're like, it wasn't us. We're not taking responsibility. We're ignoring you. So yeah, that's kind of where it's at right now, which is just crazy. And in terms of the rant that I wanted to go on, people like to say degrees like anthropology or sociology or whatever are BS degrees. I'm very happy with mine. It's exactly up my alley. It is exactly my interest, and I use my sociology degree every single fucking day of my life. And I'm happy to use it. But because it's so frowned upon and those jobs are not paid a lot and all of these things, like, you need a sociologist in tech places for ethics. You need sociologists in law offices. You need sociologists when it comes to urban planning. You need sociologists when it comes to healthcare. You need sociologists when it comes to politics. You need sociologists when it comes to military. You need sociologists when it comes to war. You just need sociologists, because the way that we are taught to examine the world through all aspects of it, the way the sociological lens allows us to see patterns in our history and work through those patterns and find different avenues, the way sociologists are able to have a direct bird's eye view of society and be able to just notice things that most people wouldn't notice, would stop us from so many situations that have damaged us. If there was a sociologist in the room when they were making Agent Orange, they would probably suggest another way. Because now the implication, even having the war be 47 years ago, ended 47 years ago, there's a big ass implication on the United States in terms of responsibility, in terms of what these people are supposed to be able to be compensated, and how we're supposed to fix and clean up all the damage that we did because we just decided, hey, this is totally fine. Not to mention the U.S. soldiers that were exposed and told that it was harmless. You know what I'm saying? And so it's just one of those things where it's like, we need sociologists, anthropologists, and people of that stature in the fucking room at all times in all aspects of our lives. And I guarantee you, put some respect on our names, first and foremost, but secondly, understand that our whole world would probably be so fucking different. And it just, like, reading this again, researching it when I was writing this script, it just is one of those things where it just makes me sad that such beautiful people in such a beautiful country have to deal with the effects of a war that ended almost 50 years ago that we have no intention of helping them deal with. So, anyway, like I said, I hope you enjoyed whatever pictures I was able to scrounge up of my trip to Vietnam. I had an amazing time, and if you want me to do a video about it, I will. I can talk about how we were scammed at the airport. I can talk about a bunch of stuff. I had a wonderful time. It is truly a beautiful country, and I'm counting down the days till I'm able to afford to go back and travel like I did when I was in high school. Look up Agent Orange. We're gonna, like I said, we're gonna watch an Agent Orange documentary on my channel, and you'll see the real effects of Agent Orange, and I'm really excited to show that to you guys. I'll be reacting to that sometime after this video is posted. But again, happy Asian American and Pacific Islander History Month. Love y'all. Shouts out to y'all. And yeah, without further ado, Black Lives Matter and Free Palestine until it's backwards. Love you.